Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the Vibrant Health Podcast, hosted by myself, Jessica Espinoza, and my friend and colleague, Lydia Shatney. I am a wellness coach and educator whose main goal is to help inspire you to live your most vibrant life. You can find me writing about all things health and wellness over at deliciousobsessions.com and jessicaespinoza.com. Lydia is a nutritional therapist and founder of the Divine Health from the InsideOut.com website, where she works with clients all over the country and helps them improve and regain their health using nutritional and mineral balancing protocols. We are so excited that you're taking time out of your day to tune in. But before we get started, since this is a health-related podcast, it should be noted that we are not licensed medical professionals. The information and advice provided in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prescribe for any illness or health issue and should not be construed as medical advice. You should always consult with your medical practitioner before making any changes to your diet, supplementation, medication, or lifestyle. Now, on to today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get this show started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 34 of the Vibrant Health Podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. I am here with my co-host, Lydia, and we are really excited to have our friend Lori Roop back on the show today. Lori actually joined us back on episode number 30 and spoke about mold illness and CIRS, which is Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, then I highly recommend it, as it's a primer for what Lori's going to talk to us about today. For those of you who don't know Lori, she is a certified clinical herbalist and clinical nutritionist and a mold illness survivor. Lori attended the Rocky Mountain Center for Botanical Studies, where she has completed over 1,300 hours of study in a wide range of herbal medicine topics. Lori has had an incredible journey of healing, and I am so thankful that she finally found the answers that she needed when she got her mold illness diagnosis. I knew Lori when her health was at its worst, and it was truly heartbreaking for me to see her suffer as much as she did. And she suffered with no answers from the over 60 practitioners that she saw over the course of about 6 years. No one could tell her what was going on and why she was so sick. But thankfully, she finally found some answers and has started to regain her health, and now she wants to help spread the word about mold illness and hopefully help others who are suffering from this little-known health issue. So welcome back to the show, Lori. We are so happy you could join us today.
Thank you. I am so excited to be joining you guys. Thanks for having me on and sharing all this information.
Absolutely. I know Lydia had mentioned that she got a lot of interest after the first episode went live, so it's the perfect time to do a follow-up episode.
Sounds good. That sounds good. Well, I'm excited to, get into this.
Perfect. Well, Lydia, I didn't really introduce you like I normally do, so do you want to pop in and say hi so people know you're actually here?
I'm here. Hello, everyone. I'm kind of taking the backstage in this podcast here. Lori do the talking, but if you haven't listened to that first podcast, please listen to it, even if you have no idea why you would need to. You just never know. It may kind of touch you and give you some information for someone in your life. I've had a lot of people contact me about it already. So there's not a ton of information out there easily accessible about this. So it's important that we can spread this because it's very real and it can be healed, And so Lori is graciously giving of her time because she doesn't want to see other people go through this either. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and let Lori do her part of the podcast, and I'm just going to kind of sit back here and learn.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah. So, Lori, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about you and your journey, just for those who may have not listened to that first episode yet, just so that they're familiar with you, and then we can dive into the nitty-gritty of what you wanted to talk about today.
Well, nice. Yeah, you really covered it pretty well in your introduction, that I am a mold illness sufferer. Couldn't find any practitioner in the Denver-Boulder area. Now there are more doctors in the Denver-Boulder area that are treating, but I do think people need to be careful. I think there's a lot of inadequate treatment of mold illness. So really finding a knowledgeable practitioner, I think, is key. At my worst, I spent about 2 years off and on bedridden, unable to drive, unable to work, unable to take care of my own children. It destroyed my family financially, and unbelievably, it did not destroy my marriage. I know a lot of marriages dissolve under this pressure. I am well into recovery, but it's something I must manage for the rest of my life. I'm also the founder of the Denver area Mold Illness and Support Group. We have a Facebook group online, so we meet once a month, so we can kind of share resources and support each other. And like you said, my goal is to educate people about the dangers of mold and mold illness.
Yeah, you really have had, and I know there's a lot of people that maybe even had, rougher stories than yours, but yours was really bad. And as somebody that was watching from the outside, it really did break my heart. So I'm glad that you are giving of your time and helping other people, just because this is not something that's well known. I mean, there's tons of information out there about other chronic illness and, Hashimoto's and all of that stuff, but this is really an area that's not being touched on as much. Thankfully, more information is coming to light about it, but it's an area that's new to a lot of people, and we really appreciate you giving of your time to help spread the word. So in the last episode, we really kind of covered all of the basics of mold illness, what it is, the basics of treatment and all of that. So I know today you wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how it's diagnosed and then how it's treated, and get into a little bit more of the technical aspects of that. So let's go ahead and kind of dive into that. And I also know you want to preface this by talking about the perspective that you come from when it comes to dealing with mold illness.
Yes, because there are so many different ideas about what mold illness means. I do want to let people know I'm coming from a shoemaker perspective, and I am an herbalist and nutritionist, like you said, so I'm also influenced by nutrition and herbs. My shoemaker certified doctor for myself is a naturopath, Dr. Robin Thompson. She's in Bozeman, Montana. And then I'm also, my mold illness mentor is the herbalist and naturopath, Dr. Cheryl Tilner. There's a couple reasons I chose the shoemaker protocol. I found it has the most research. It has the most patients coming through the protocol, and by far the most data accumulated of any protocol. Like Shoemaker himself has seen over 7,000 patients since 1998, and McMahon, who's a Shoemaker certified doc, I believe he might have been the one first trained by Shoemaker, he's seen over 700 CIRS, CIRS patients. The Shoemaker protocol is the basis for many of the mold docs that exist around the country. So even if someone's not following a strictly Shoemaker protocol, they've usually started with his information. I'm biased, it did. It saved my life. The Shoemaker protocol did. But I also chose the Shoemaker protocol for the strong research it had backing it. And I've also seen literally countless patients improve while participating on the Facebook groups and following the Shoemaker protocol. And so like we talked about before, when I'd seen so many doctors and I had given every modality a chance to heal me, I saw naturopaths, I saw chiropractors, I saw nutritionists, I saw functional med doctors, herbalists. I'm an herbalist myself. Of course, it broke my heart that nutrition and herbs, wasn't going to cure me of this. Massage therapists, craniosacral, MDs. I used essential oils. I used frequency medicine. I used traumatic brain injury treatment. I used vision therapy. None of these gave me sustained, significant improvement. And that's because none of these modalities were treating the root cause, which was mold illness.
Right.
And so what you had talked about earlier is how doctors kind of go through and officially diagnose someone with CIRS, CIRS. So I'll give the example from the Shoemaker docs that I see, Dr. Robin Thompson, and she has a partner in Bozeman, Montana, Dr. Milani also. So here are some questions that they're going to ask people. So first one, does a person have a multi-symptom illness? Has the person been exposed to mold or possibly any other biotoxins? And we talked about some of those other biotoxins in the first podcast. Mm-hmm. Have other conditions that have multi-system and multi-symptom illness been ruled out, such as autoimmune disease, diabetes? Does the Shoemaker lab panel show dysregulation characteristic of biotoxin illness? And does the person fail their VCS test? And so I believe you gave the link to the VCS test on the last podcast too.
Yeah, we did. And that'll be in the show notes for this one as well. And that's a really easy one. It's cheap. You can go and do it. That's kind of the first place that you can start if you suspect it. And there'll be a link in our show notes for that as well. So check that out if you want to try it.
And Dr. Thompson and Dr. Milani say that if at least the first 4 questions can be answered with a yes, then that'll give a positive diagnosis. Wow. So I thought we could also go over why some people get sick and others don't.
Yes, I think this is important.
So we often say in health-related issues, the dose is the poison. Here's what changes with mold illness. This is not applicable in CIRS, aka mold illness. The person's susceptibility is what determines the poison. And this is what we call primed, meaning that once you have been exposed to mold and your immune system kind of goes haywire, it means you have a primed immune system for mold illness, and it will react wildly to the smallest amounts of problems, like in a water-damaged building. So this is a little different mindset than what most doctors or other health educators are aware of.
Right.
And then we also talked before in the first podcast with the HLA-DR variants met. But remember, just having the variants does not mean you are sick. Having that HLA-DR variants, that means you're susceptible. So a lot of people just want to use that test just to see if they're sick, and that's not going to show you if you're sick. It's just going to show you if you're susceptible. The results of the specific Shoemaker lab panel showing dysregulation, that's what's going to show you are sick. And then you can find that lab panel on survivingmold.com, which is Shoemaker's website.
And for the listeners the HLA-DR is actually a genetic test.
Yes.
So for those people that haven't listened to that first one and don't know what that is, can you just briefly touch on what that is?
It just shows the genetic variants of haplotypes. So, most people will show up with 2 different haplotypes. So you can have 1 or 2 that are mold susceptible, multi-susceptible, Lyme susceptible, and often if you have 2 of those susceptible haplotypes, you might be sicker, but some people get super sick even with just 1 haplotype.
Mm-hmm. And roughly, I believe the number was roughly 24% of the population is going to have the HLA-DR, the variant.
Yes. Yes,
okay,
we
so
have
about a quarter of the population.
Right. I know, 1 in 4.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people.
Right. So again, the people without the HLA variants will most likely be able to excrete the inhaled mycotoxins on their own when they leave a water-damaged building. So that's one of the things we covered in the last podcast, that once someone who does not have the HLA variants, maybe this is what you were asking Jessica before, once someone who does not have the HLA variants, they walk into a water-damaged building, they're going to inhale the mycotoxins, their bodies are going to see that toxin, they're going to tag it as an antigen, they're going to create antibodies to it, and they're going to excrete those toxins out. And for those of us with the HLA-DR variants and who have also been primed, now our bodies are not able to see the mycotoxins in our body. And so they accumulate, and they're going to make people really sick.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. That was one thing that I had forgotten. So it's almost like your cells become blind to the toxins that are there.
Yes.
So your body is just unable to remove them because it doesn't even see that you've got a problem.
Yep,
so
it's lost that ability.
Okay. So, yes, thank you for adding that in, because I think that's a really important part for people to understand.
Oh, good. And, yes, Shoemaker talks about this on his website. There is going to be some people, even if they have the HLA, they may be able to leave the water-damaged building, and they're going to recover on their own. And then there will be other people like me who absolutely need an outside intervention to help remove those mycotoxins, which I use the Shoemaker protocol. It performs that duty.
Well, I forgot.
Right. So there's kind of a spectrum of treatment. Some people may be able to just simply remove themselves from the environment and their body will be able to heal itself. There's going to be other people who are just too sick. No matter what they do with reducing their exposure and making sure they're in a safe place, they're going to need some intervention of support in order to help them recover.
Yes, some people are going to need that outside intervention, and we really just don't know why. That is an area that we just haven't quite uncovered yet in the research. Some people can get better with just avoidance, and some people are going to need to use binders, which a lot of this podcast today is going to cover, that really popular topic of binders and all the problems people have with it. So It's a really critical part, and I feel like we just explained why we need binders, because these mycotoxins are in your system and you need to get them out.
Right.
So I've also wanted to point out to people that I read roughly 5% or fewer people who get mold illness do not have the HLA-DR variants. And another Shoemaker certified doc reported this number is around 1% in his practice. So he's saying that almost everyone in this practice has the HLA-DR. But these people still get very, very sick. And really, like I was saying, this is largely unexplained, except that we also have information that if you have enough of a reduction in your hormone, MSH, which is melanocyte-stimulating hormone, it can leave you susceptible to mold illness. Mm-hmm. So even if you don't have the HLA, if your MSH goes low enough, you're still going to get really sick from mold illness. It's always a possibility. And as Shoemaker likes to say, nothing in biology is 100%. So
I think we all know that.
Right? I know. There's never like just a perfect answer that fits 100% of the time. It's not ever quite like that.
Yeah.
So I thought if it is determined you're sick, then we can go over treatment begins, and Shoemaker outlines it on their survivingmold.com website under step-by-step. So this is a little bit of a recap from the first podcast. I feel it's really important. Number one, step one, is to get out of the mold. And it's more correctly, it's the water damage building that you need to get out of, because remember, in the first podcast, we covered the plethora of molecules and particles that exist in a water damage building. It is not just mold. Mm-hmm. And again, if someone gets better by leaving the water damage building, then no more treatment is needed. Number two for Shoemaker, start cholestyramine or Welchol. These are bile acid sequestrants. Bile acid sequestrants are anion exchange resins that bind bile acids in the intestine and do not allow it to be taken up by the enterohepatic circulation. The insoluble complex of bile acids and bound mycotoxins are all then excreted in the feces. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can you?
For the most part.
Can you expound a little? So, I mean, I'm educated on bile and helping my clients get their bile flowing better, right? So you're saying that this is going to do more than just that. You're going to get the bile flowing, and then you're going to help it so that these mold particles aren't going to get absorbed in the body as they're excreted, kind of thing, or?
Well, actually, the bile acid sequestrants don't really help promote bile flow. So, like, what you and I offer, Lydia, what I find is really helpful, because once digestion slows down and you have reduced bile flow, then it's going to inhibit cholestyramine or Welchol for doing what it needs to work. Okay. But we have the enterohepatic circulation, and you have bile acids that go through in the intestine, and then they're going to get absorbed back up because human beings they recycle this. You don't want to spend all your energy making new bile acids every single time that you're using it for your entire life. So we recycle certain things in the body. So mycotoxins get in that bile. They're like mycotoxin-laden bile. So then the cholestyramine comes in, and it binds to the bile. And now that bile cannot get reabsorbed back up into the body.
Okay.
And because that big insoluble complex, it binds tightly. The cholestyramine binds tightly to the bile, and now it comes out in your poop.
Okay.
And that's how you're getting mycotoxins out of your body.
Got it.
Yeah, right? I find it pretty fascinating. And so cholestyramine is what they used to use before statins hit the scene. Cholestyramine is what they used to reduce cholesterol. And they did this because the cholestyramine would bind to the bile acids. Now the body had to, and it would excrete that out, so the body would have to use cholesterol to help create more bile acids, and so therefore it would lower the overall cholesterol level. Now there's some debate whether cholestyramine actually did work that well for really lowering cholesterol. Some say it just never was that great at lowering cholesterol on its own, but it really works fantastically to remove mycotoxins.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this use of cholestyramine to lower cholesterol is considered off-label. which Shoemaker writes is legal, ethical, and a part of standard medical practice in his CSM fact sheet. And I know that I'll send you that link so you can put it in the show notes, Jessica.
Okay.
Well, you probably already have that one. And so it just means that you're using it for something that the studies were not, there was no research showing the use of this medication for, but the FDA also ruled in 1999 that there was no reason to expect an increased risk to health from use of cholestyramine in a group of patients who have biotoxin illness from those who don't. So it's a really common medication that has relatively very few side effects. We'll talk about some of the side effects, what you do to work around them. But it's safe. It's been used by millions of people. And so we find it to be of great use in the mold community.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about exactly how, here are some steps I have. Oh, so a lot of people say, well, I'm worried that cholestyramine is going to stay in my body, and it is synthetic, so they don't want to take this synthetic and then have it stay in your body. And I don't have a source for this information, but I was told by another expert that in researching it, they have weighed the cholestyramine before someone took it, and then they took their poop, they separated the cholestyramine away from the poop, and then they weighed the cholestyramine after it went through someone, and all of it came out.
Wow. That's not a study that I would have wanted to be a scientist on, but I'm glad that they did it.
What a great job.
Oh, I think it's cool.
I know, right? You know.
I don't have problem talking about my own poop, but I just, when we start getting into other poop, it's just, yeah.
Okay, well,
boy.
Yep, it's part of the mom job, right?
Oh yes, I'm bracing myself. I've got enough mom friends on Facebook, and I see their comments, their poop stories about their children, and I'm just like, wow, I've got a lot to look forward to.
Oh yes, yes.
And that's only one thing.
Yeah. So,
boy.
Basically, you take cholestyramine to bind mycotoxins in your system, which then you excrete in your stool. So, taking cholestyramine, if you have mold illness, performs a function in your body that it isn't able to do on its own. So, I also supplied some research, which I know Jessica is going to put in the show notes, that support the use of cholestyramine as a bile acid sequestrant. And so then the next big question I get from
I will definitely add those in.
Oh, good. And then the next big question I get from people is cholestyramine is a prescription, so they may or may not have access to a doctor, or maybe they want to use something a little bit natural. So they always bring up, what about natural binders such as clay, charcoal, and others? And both Shoemaker and Dr. Cheryl Tilner have worked very hard to try to use natural binders. And throughout everything that they have tried, they have just not found that natural binders are as effective or reliable or consistent. Every once in a while, someone really gets a lot of relief from it. That's great. But overall, it's just not a consistent help for people. And it just takes so much longer. People get really sick, and they might have to be on cholestyramine for a while. And so a natural binder, you could be using it for years and just seeing very little progress. And so this is just one of the reasons that they have not. And think about Dr. Cheryl Tilner as a naturopath. Her whole entire life is built around natural products. And if she's saying that she's tried them and she just couldn't find good results with natural binders, I find that to be a really reliable source.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So maybe in the future we'll find something that is as reliable as a natural binder. But in the end, we just want people to get better, so we try to recommend what is going to help people to get better. So, also, since this is a podcast run by my two friends who are natural-minded bloggers, and I'm sure we'll have natural-minded listeners, I do want to address some worries people have when they say they just don't want to take meds at all. Cholestyramine and Welchol, which are the bile acid sequestrants, they're not natural products. So first, I'm going to explain my position, and then I'll explain how they're used. Anyway, I'll explain it all. So I consider myself and practice as a vitalist herbalist. So what does this mean? Vitalism to me is a very large and complex subject, but I'll try to make this as concise as possible. Vitalism is a holistic approach aimed at improving health through supporting one's vital force. And you also address mind, body, spirit, and the interconnectedness of the world. But one tenet of vitalism is the belief that the body can oftentimes heal itself if given the right tools or remove the roadblocks that are prohibiting health. As Vitalist Herbalists, we suggest diet, we suggest lifestyle changes, herbs, other relevant modalities as a way to support the body to heal. Like, our goal is to address the root cause of whatever is causing the problem, which I find often to be in direct opposition to mainstream medicine, whose main goal is to use meds to suppress symptoms. My favorite example is high blood pressure meds. Doctors don't typically try to find out why the person's blood pressure is high and deal with the cause, but they just immediately give a med to suppress the high blood pressure. So now let's think about cholestyramine in this picture. Shoemaker already knows what the basic root cause as to why you're feeling sick with mold illness. And yes, for people already in the community, this can be debated that the actual root causes are the gene variances, but we can't do anything about gene variances yet. Shoemaker is working on those, or maybe they'll say that like a primed immune system is the root cause, but we have stuff to work with that also. But really a big crux of it is because the body lacks the ability to see and identify and excrete the mycotoxins in the system. So we use cholestyramine to bind to these biotoxins and escort them out of the body. So like we had been saying before, cholestyramine performs a function in your body that your body is unable to perform itself. You are mechanistically removing the biotoxins, but then you're vitalistically removing the roadblock that was impairing health.
That's a beautiful summation of that, because I know that, myself, I don't use any pharmaceuticals unless I absolutely have to, and I know that a lot of our listeners feel the same way, but there are some cases where pharmaceutical drugs do need to be used, and this is a really legitimate and good case where the drug is going to serve some sort of purpose that your body is simply unable to perform at this time. So
you're not suppressing anything.
Yeah.
And this is the heart of what medicine really should be anyway. So when we do, there are cases where we do, and that's the whole point, original point at least.
Right.
So no, it's great. I appreciate your extra explanation for that, because it's well said.
Well, good. And sometimes I get even a little bit crazier, and I compare cholestyramine to a prosthetic limb, because you need that prosthetic limb to, like, let's say it's a leg, you need that to walk upright. It's going to make your body work better. You're never going to regrow that leg. You just need it to do something that your body cannot do on its own. And I see cholestyramine as stepping in right now to do something that our body cannot perform on its own. Maybe in the future we're going to be able to reverse that, and I hope so. But that's how I see the use of cholestyramine right now.
I totally agree. That's a great explanation for everything. So hopefully that soothes some concerns that people might have about using a pharmaceutical. And you have to remember that a lot of people that are they're finally finding mold illness as being the root cause for them. Some of these people are very, very sick, and they have tried everything, just like you did. You had so many different diagnoses, and you tried everything you possibly could, and nothing was working. And sometimes you have to call in the big guns to get your health back on track. So there's definitely nothing wrong with that.
Well, cool.
Awesome. So do you want to talk a little bit about what happens? Let's see. I think we're going to go into what happens if people can't tolerate.
Well, actually, there's a few downsides that people theorize about when using cholestyramine, and I just kind of wanted to address those.
Okay.
Yeah, so Susie Cohen has an article that talked about cholestyramine depletes magnesium, fat-soluble vitamins, and folate. I'm sure it has a side effect. There's side effects to everything. Then my question is, to what extent does cholestyramine deplete those vitamins and nutrients? And so I can share my own experience. I've been checking my RBC magnesium, which I know that Lydia uses also in her practice to check, and it's a favorite. And even though I have been on cholestyramine for longer than the typical CIRS patient, I've had some setbacks where I've had to stay on it. I quit taking my Remag, which is the magnesium I have to take from Dr. Carolyn Dean because all other magnesium gives me a laxative effect. But it helps build my magnesium stores. And so the entire time I've been on cholestyramine, I have not been on my Remag. I just retested, and my last magnesium test, I was still not dropped below 6.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Awesome.
That's
right?
impressive.
I'm below 6 last time I tested, so that's fantastic.
And now I'd been on Remag for a while to bring that up because I'd been low when I first tested. But I had brought it up. And so now once up, and even though cholestyramine is supposed to deplete magnesium, it really hasn't, to a very large extent, if at all, depleted much of my magnesium. If that makes sense.
That's great. Well, it's good to partner that what you're doing with the additional tests, the red blood cell count magnesium test.
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I like to see it at 6.5, but 6 is nothing to turn away either. That's a good,
right. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm back on the Remag to go ahead and bring it up further. I had just quit taking it when I started the Shoemaker protocol. It was like such a big deal to go on the protocol and keep it all straight. So
yeah,
I'd cut back on a lot of other stuff. And I thought, oh no, my magnesium's tanked. But it hasn't.
This is why we test, right?
Yeah, right?
Yep.
Right. So, and she talked about fat-soluble vitamins, and we all know how important those are. So, I mean, I have a really good diet, but I always want to try to help myself when I can. So I take the brand that Cresser recommends. It's from Nutricology, and I have it on my Amazon store, so I just help that to boost my fat-soluble vitamins. And maybe even Lydia might have some more suggestions, too, about some good fat-soluble vitamins that mold illness sufferers can take.
Well, I'm not familiar with the one that you're talking about. Is it all the fat solubles in one product?
I can't remember. I'd have to look that up again.
Yeah, because it's tricky. Fat-soluble vitamins are tricky. So I don't usually give people a broad option other than maybe the Nordic Naturals Arctic cod liver oil or Rosita's cod liver oil or liver pills, for your vitamin A and D. You don't really need it. Most people are really confused about vitamin D. That's a whole other podcast.
Right.
And then the K2 piece. So there's a lot of that we can't really walk away from this podcast with a exact solution on the fat solubles for everyone. So
Right.
But they are important, that's for sure. So it's good that you're making sure you're supporting that because it's hard to get in the diet. It's very, very hard to get enough in the diet.
Right.
Even if you're eating good.
Right. So, well, in conclusion to all that, I would just say that I myself, and then also I've talked to my Shoemaker doc, Thompson, in Bozeman, Montana, kind of fairly extensively about this, and just overall, she's not seeing any major issues either from long-term use of cholestyramine. So we're just seeing the benefits far outweigh any problems. So that's a big help.
It's probably hard to say since everybody who might get a mold illness diagnosis is going to be unique in their situation, but is there usually an average duration of how long people have to take the CSM, the cholestyramine, or does it really vary from person to person?
Well, I used to see, I think it was in the Shoemaker literature, and maybe Dr. McMahon, they had talked about only using it for 9 months. But when Shoemaker started all this, he was looking at Pfiesteria, and then he realized that this is much bigger than Pfiesteria, and he moved on to water-damaged buildings. And I think what we're finding is that people have just been left with like a chronic fatigue illness, chronic fatigue diagnosis, fibromyalgia, Lyme, MS, and we've not really counted them until they find out that maybe they don't have those and they in fact have mold illness. And so then we're like, well, these people are really sick. And so I think we're finding more and more people that we didn't know about, and I don't really know that there's like an average number because these patients we're just finding more and more people that have it, and so we're not even sure who is mainly the people that have this problem.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was any way to really even get an average for that. So.
And it might be somewhere too. I may not just have that data.
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely. No No worries. I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. And so I also want to address, there are people that cannot tolerate cholestyramine. And so I really recommend, people are going to say, well, what are my reactions going to be? I really recommend working with your shoemaker doctor or someone else on this, because that's pretty hard for me to explain in this podcast, to try to differentiate for people when they really can't tolerate it or when they're just in the middle of an intensification reaction. But the people that absolutely cannot tolerate cholestyramine, Dr. Shoemaker will then often use Welchol. So this cholestyramine has to be taken away from food. Welchol can be taken with food, but it's only about 25% as effective. So it's still going to take you longer to get well. But if that's what you have to use because you can't tolerate cholestyramine, then, that's what you have to use.
Mm-hmm.
Another little trick is, I know lots of the Shoemaker certified doctors and Tilner herself, they'll often use a combination of cholestyramine mixed with a natural binder. So the clay or the charcoal, they'll mix that with the cholestyramine, and this will help reduce cost and hopefully will still work fairly effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So just another little trick for people to try. And so again, yes, some people are going to get well with natural binders, but just overall, they're not as effective, consistent, or reliable. If you're a person that wants to try it, I do suggest you try it. If you've been diagnosed with mold illness, you're like, well, I want to try and see what happens. No harm in that, that's for sure. Here are some other steps when people are getting started taking cholestyramine, because this can be a really big deal. A lot of things that can happen to you, so I have a few steps to go over. So start your dose of cholestyramine or Welchol low and slow, and only increase your dose as tolerated. So I personally had to start with a 1/4 teaspoon of cholestyramine, and I could only increase the dose by 1 gram every 3rd day. I had terrible reactions to cholestyramine, but these reactions only lasted about 2 weeks, and that is pretty common. Yes, there's variables, but that 2-week window right there of the intensification reaction, which we'll go over later, that is really common. And then most people do pretty well after that 2 weeks. I've heard of people having to cut their Welchol into slivers. I have heard people having to peel the coating off the Welchol. So do know that some of us have had to really work hard at getting these bile acid sequestrants.
Wow.
Yeah. And here's another one. People will take cholestyramine for 2 weeks and they're like, oh, this doesn't work. I don't feel better. I had to take cholestyramine at full dose. Now, full dose of, we'll go over doses later, but I had to take it at full dose for 2 to 3 months before I saw any improvement whatsoever. So if you feel improvement right away at 2 weeks, consider yourself lucky. There are a lot of people that it takes months before they're going to start feeling better.
Wow.
So that is why I suggest that people stick with it, because then when it does kick in, you're not going to believe how much better you feel. It's amazing.
Wow.
A couple other things that you can use is taking high-dose fish oil and use the low amylose diet, and these will help cut down on problematic symptoms of taking cholestyramine. I think the Shoemaker docs recommend taking 2 to 4 weeks, so using your high-dose fish oil and your low amylose diet about 2 to 4 weeks before you start cholestyramine. If you don't start them before, that's okay. Start them when you start to feel bad, and they'll help people oftentimes just using them in that way. High-dose fish oil in the Shoemaker protocol means taking 4,200 milligrams of EPA and DHA combined.
Okay.
So that's just something that they use in the protocol. There are going to be some people, they can't even tolerate dust. It's just such a tiny amount of cholestyramine, and they still can't tolerate it. Every once in a while, some of the shoe docs, if you have a Shoemaker certified doctor, they will try the VIP ahead of schedule. And they're basically just using that to calm your system down so you could tolerate the medication needed to get the mycotoxins out of your system. So if you're listening to this and you have this problem with cholestyramine, ask your doctor about it. And then also Dr. McMahon has a homeopathic protocol that he has successfully used with people who cannot tolerate cholestyramine whatsoever. It's I've looked at the protocol, and it basically just addresses a lot of liver and kidneys. And he says that anyone who's had problems that can't tolerate cholestyramine, he puts them on the homeopathic protocol, and afterward they can.
Interesting. And can you just really quickly tell people what the VIP is?
Vasoactive intestinal polypeptide.
And that's just another medication that's part of the protocol at like a later period?
Yes, this is almost always the very last step, except for the situation I just described. And a lot of people, if they were just not terribly sick, they'll never even have to go on VIP. Okay. And then some people, they're just so sick, they basically work through the protocol so they can start VIP. And it basically is just used to regulate our bodies. It just does so many different things. It's amazing. So basically our bodies have gone haywire. Our immune system's out of control. Everything is just messed up. Just super simplistically, VIP helps regulate us back to normal. And actually, on the Facebook groups that I'm in, on the Mold Illness Facebook groups, I've asked people, like, what would you describe VIP does for you? And often I hear that people will say, it helps me feel human again.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
I know, right? So that's why, that's a well-sought-after medication also. And you can see why. Okay. It's just been so helpful. Mm-hmm. So I thought now let's talk about some of the side effects of cholestyramine and some natural ways to remedy them. The most common symptom from cholestyramine is constipation. So just over and over and over, this is what I hear from people are like, and they don't want to try it because they're scared they're going to get constipated because they've already had problems. And this is why many other practitioners, natural practitioners like Lydia and others who are working with people, they have a lot of ways to prevent this constipation also. So Dr. Shoemaker recommends a higher intake of fruit and fiber, and if those don't work, he suggests Miralax. But instead of Miralax, I recommend using magnesium. And I will use magnesium citrate. And I like to do this because the constipation that I see that comes on from this usually comes on fairly intensely. Like that first dose, people are like, whoa, I need to do something about this right away. So I suggest having magnesium citrate in your house before you start cholestyramine, especially if you're prone to constipation.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why I use the magnesium citrate because it's not super well absorbed. And so it can be used for the laxative effect, and then it's actually I find it to be more well absorbed than magnesium oxide. So at least maybe they're getting a little bit of help for magnesium. I'm not sure.
It's like 30%. It's really low.
Oh, is that what it is? Nice.
Yeah, for citrate. Oxide's terrible, but it works to make you poop. So.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a good idea to do it for any length of time, but in an emergency, it works.
Nice. Yeah. So the dose of laxative effective magnesium is really dependent on each person, but common ranges that people can start with are between 200 and 600 milligrams. I like the powder magnesium so that I can have clients change their doses more specifically, whether it needs to go up and down. And I recommend to people that people take that magnesium dose at night, and then hopefully the next morning they have a bowel movement. And I use magnesium I dose to tolerance, meaning that you increase your dose every night until the next morning you'll have loose stools. Then you go back to the previous dose. So you want to dose right up to where you have loose stools, but then you don't. So go back one.
Yep.
Is that kind of how you do it too?
Yeah,
Lydia?
I actually have a whole blog post about this.
Nice, yes.
We can link to that process in there. It's actually the whole process for using magnesium for this issue.
Nice, right, yeah.
And
awesome.
And in this case, this isn't a good long-term solution for the majority of people, but when you really need to go, you got to go. So, I mean, it can work really well for this reason alone. So, it's a good remedy for sure.
Right. And a lot of times this will go away. The constipation from cholestyramine will often go away for people as they use cholestyramine longer.
Now, I would say this, and you have to correct me if this is not effective, but so when people are working up their dose, because some people may need a lot more than that, right? I'm sure you've seen that. And I've seen that with people who I don't treat for mold illness, but I'm helping them, just get better. bowel movements and such, they need a lot, and it's just, you really don't want to start out with a huge amount all at once. You want to let your body adjust to it. So, but I like to make sure people are pooping every day. So do you ever recommend they just get an enema kit and make sure they're clearing while this starts to work?
See, that's a great idea. I don't, just because most mold illness patients, when they're starting this, they're just so overwhelmed. They're like, it's really intense for them to start this whole protocol. But I think, I'm so glad you brought this up, because if one of them felt like, hey, I've done enemas before, I could handle this, that'd be a great alternative.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody likes the idea of doing an enema, and I've dealt with that.
Right.
But the emphasis here really is you're trying to get this stuff out of you.
Yes, you don't want to get blocked up.
So you don't want to go too many days without clearing.
Right.
So it's not like, the person would have to do this every single day or anything, but in the interim, to kind of, it's just a quart of warm water, and it could really clear the pipes.
Right? Yeah. So, I would definitely say if a mold illness client is up to that, that is another great remedy they could use.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the enema kit, and most people are freaked out by it, but we need to embrace this tool because it's pretty helpful.
Right. Mm-hmm. So another common side effect of cholestyramine, this is probably the second most common one, is acid reflux, indigestion, heartburn. So while mainstream medicine may still believe that acid reflux is always due to too much stomach acid, I would say most of us in the holistic health community are aware of the pioneering work of Dr. Jonathan Wright in the Tahoma Clinic in his revolutionary book, Why Stomach Acid is Good for You. And we see stomach acid as beneficial and that most people are actually low and not that most people have too much.
One of the best books out there. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's really good.
Isn't that good? I love that book. I personally use hydrochloric acid with great success on myself when experiencing the acid reflux as a side effect when beginning cholestyramine. So I just upped my dose of that. Some other little tricks that Dr. Shoemaker lists is mixing the cholestyramine powder with apple juice or cranberry juice, or here it is, first dissolving cholestyramine in lukewarm water, then adding ice. And these are all just techniques to help with that heartburn that you feel. I personally use an organic apple juice that has a little bit of pulp in it, and then it helps the cholestyramine not get so gritty in my throat. But overall, heartburn just doesn't last that long. So that's fortunate that it's usually those first 2 weeks, and it kind of comes on for a little bit, and then it passes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I also wanted to go over what happens when someone first takes cholestyramine, and it makes them feel so much worse. It can freak people out. It's so intense. And so Dr. Shoemaker writes in his book that this herx is most experienced by those who also have Lyme. But in the mold community, like in the Facebook groups, I see plenty of people without Lyme that also experience, it's basically the hellishness of cholestyramine. And so Dr. Shoemaker has labeled this the intensification reaction. So this is the description of the intensification reaction from Dr. Shoemaker in Desperation Medicine, one of his books. And I found this excerpt through Eric Johnson, who is a well-known mold avoidance advocate. So from Desperation Medicine by Richie Shoemaker, page 250. Lessons from solving the Herxheimer. Descriptions of the intensification reaction that takes place whenever the body rids itself of chronic toxins. So after therapy with cholestyramine, have opened a window on one of the least understood mechanisms in human physiology, the intensely uncomfortable symptoms that together make up what medical science now describes as the Herxheimer reaction. Remember, though, that the intensification reaction follows therapy with cholestyramine, while the Herxheimer reaction, which is much less severe, often occurs in the wake of antibiotic therapy. So, question. Why is it that the vitally helpful and health-restoring process of binding, which is what we do with cholestyramine, and then removing toxins so often triggers an accentuation the intensification reaction of such debilitating symptoms as fatigue, muscle aches, headache, and confusion. And then Shoemaker writes, the paradox. Before you can get better, you'll have to get worse for a while. So then he goes on page 265. So this is really the description. When the toxin dissociates from its nuclear receptor, it moves from cell to cell, where it will often act to disrupt electrical function. In many cases, however, the invader will end up impairing phosphatase activity or even binding to a nuclear receptor in a different cell. This model posits an equilibrium of toxin distribution in the body, but that equilibrium is obviously disrupted when cholestyramine triggers the drainage process, thus pulling the plug on circulating toxins. Next question. Does this sudden disruption of the toxin equilibrium make the poison move faster, thus activating more TNF genes, which are tumor necrosis factor, than normal in a given period of time? That hypothesis dovetails nicely with the clinical image of the TNF storm precipitated by cholestyramine. So another doctor, Dr. Todison, explained to Shoemaker regarding ciguatoxin. The point is not that the dissociation constant is low, but rather that there is a dissociation constant. That means if you find soluble toxin, the neural tissue releases more. The point here is that the CSM binding will bring about a dissociation of toxin from its tissue binding. So Shoemaker writes, here is the mechanism I had been looking for. Disruption of dissociation equilibrium continually releases new toxin molecules from their binding sites or receptors, resulting in the blizzard of symptoms even though the total amount of toxin isn't changed. Dr. Richie Shoemaker. Okay, so that gets really complicated, right?
Yeah, I love that last part of it, though. Essentially, your body is going to be spilling the stored toxins, so your actual toxin level hasn't changed, but it's just causing them to be released, which is stirring up the problem.
Yes.
I love that description. That was perfect. Because I haven't studied that a whole lot, but a lot of people in the natural remedies, natural health world know that sometimes people go through these a healing crisis when they start something new where they start feeling worse before they start feeling better. So I like this definition. This is great.
Oh, good. And then I also have a quote from Eric Johnson that really sums up that whole thing nicely. Everything I just read, he sums that up. Dr. Shoemaker's own theory states that cholestyramine induces detox, and detox induces dissociation, which is an uncontrolled flood of toxins from the fatty tissues. So it really, helped me clarify, too, in my mind, trying to understand what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to say you can read much more about what Lisa Petterson and Eric Johnson have to say at paradigmchange.me. They have some great information there, and they can really fill you in on a lot of other aspects of mold illness.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that link will be in the show notes for sure.
Oh, cool. So, we haven't even covered every aspect of cholestyramine yet. You ready to hear some more?
It's a pretty big topic.
It's really big, and I feel like it's really where most people get the hang-ups right away on the Shoemaker protocol. And if they can get through this, I would say most people, this is where you see a lot of your life-changing improvements. Mm-hmm. It's just that critical. So let's cover the different types of cholestyramine. The most common form of cholestyramine, and the form that thousands of Shoemaker patients have gotten well with, is regular cholestyramine. Sometimes it's called Questrin. It can come in packets or in a can. The color of it is orangish, yellowish, and it contains artificial ingredients. Here's a list of one of the brands. It says acacia, citric acid, DNC yellow number 10, DNC yellow number 6, flavor, natural and artificial orange, polysorbate 80, propylene glycol, alginate, and sucrose. So this is the cholestyramine used by Shoemaker for the vast majority of his patients, and it has worked extremely well. Now, you guys know I'm natural-minded too, so why would I support this use of artificial ingredients? It's simple. This stuff is cheap. It is commonly covered by most insurances, and most mold illness sufferers are practically going broke from all of this. they've just been sick for so long that it's just really taken a toll on their finances. So this cholestyramine is just widely used. You can get it. Your regular doctor can prescribe it. It's easy. A dose of this regular cholestyramine is 9 grams, and a full dose of cholestyramine for mold illness sufferers is 4 doses a day. So you're going to have 9 grams a dose 4 times a day. And then you can reference the Shoemaker cholestyramine fact sheet for more information about dosing and like how to do it in between meals and what meds to separate from. Mm-hmm. So, of course, there are going to be a few people that are going to react to these additional ingredients. Like I use the regular cholestyramine with great success the first time I was in detox. Then after I was re-exposed and I had to start cholestyramine again, I found the regular cholestyramine was bothering the area on my teeth where I'd lost enamel. Now, I've lost this enamel years ago, and I really think that mold illness is the biggest problem for all my dental issues. But now that regular cholestyramine was irritating the exposed tissues from lack of enamel. So then I had to switch to the pure compounded cholestyramine. This is a pure cholestyramine resin that has no added ingredients. You're going to have to buy it from a compounding pharmacy. A dose of this pure compounded cholestyramine is 4 grams. It is quite a bit more expensive. It is often not covered by insurances, as it is compounded. A lot of insurances don't cover compounded medications. And I've heard people say that this cholestyramine is a more aggressive way to treat CIRS, but I can't really find any support for that in the Shoemaker literature. But it's definitely more expensive. If you can use the regular cholestyramine, better. If you can't, then you have an alternative, I'll bet a more expensive alternative, which is compounded cholestyramine. The other one I want to mention is cholestyramine light, or I've seen it called Questern Light. This cholestyramine has all the artificial fillers, but instead of sugar, it contains aspartame. So I think if any cholestyramine should be avoided, my opinion, it should be this one. I think we know aspartame has been recorded in the research for causing problems for decades, causes digestive upset, neurological issues, and both of these are really big problems for moldies anyway, so you're just exacerbating the problem.
And there's been lots of new studies recently about the tie between aspartame and leukemia as well. So
really?
Coming out. So I think Green Med Info has published information about it, and I actually just saw something in my Facebook news feed yesterday or the day before about a study about aspartame and leukemia, if I remember correctly. But Green Med Info has a lot of information on aspartame and even all of the other artificial. Oh, you know what? No, I think sorry. Scratch all that. I'm mixing up aspartame and Splenda is the one that's been linked to leukemia. So scratch that. I don't use any of them, so I know, right? All of them are the devil. So it was Splenda. There is information about Splenda being linked to leukemia, not aspartame, sorry. But aspartame's bad for you.
Right? Yeah. Yeah,
sorry
right.
About that.
No, we totally agree on that. Yeah. So that's the one cholestyramine I just recommend people don't even bother with. But if people have questions about like what I've gone over too, I am part of a mold Facebook group, and it's a fantastic resource where we discuss a lot of the Shoemaker protocols, and people can ask questions about different things like, oh, I'm having problems with this or that in the Shoemaker protocol, and what have other people done. And so that Facebook group was started by my friend Patty, and then my friend Pam has joined her, and Caleb and I as admin, and so I think it's been a great resource to the community. But I would say that cholestyramine questions are definitely a really big topic on the group, and people can really get more answers if they need. The group is called Toxic. You'll probably put a link to it too, huh, Jess?
Yeah, definitely.
But it is called Toxic Mold, CIRS, and Lyme Disease Support Group. And so just another great place to ask questions, and we definitely cover a lot of cholestyramine information.
Awesome. Yeah, I will put a link to that as well.
And so, to kind of wrap it up, I have put together a list. So if you're on the Shoemaker protocol and you can do regular cholestyramine that you just get from your regular pharmacy, fantastic. That's a great way to start, and hopefully you can stay there and not have to spend a bajillion dollars. But for those of us who have to go to compounded cholestyramine, a lot of us in the groups have been putting together a list of the best places to buy. So I put together a list of the top 4. It was 3, but now I have top 4 places to buy pure compounded cholestyramine in the U.S. As when I called around Denver, I was given like different compounding pharmacies. They just weren't used to supplying this for people, and so they'd quote me a price of like $1,000 or $2,000 for 1 month. So yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So here's a list for the top 4 that I found. Number 1 is Clark's Pharmacy. And Jessica, are you going to put this list on there? I have phone numbers for them.
I can, yeah, if you think it would be helpful. So this is for people, now, please, please, please don't just start taking cholestyramine.
Yes.
Because you might suspect you have issues. This is something that you need to get your proper diagnosis and you need to work with a practitioner on. I don't want people to go out and start just taking stuff. So yeah, I will definitely include this information on the site, but this is only for people who have already been diagnosed and are starting on the cholestyramine and they're under the care of a physician, of some sort of practitioner who's trained in mold illness. So I just wanted to put that little disclaimer there.
Yes.
So that people know.
Yes. So I have to be under care of a physician and only if you cannot tolerate regular cholestyramine.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1 coming in is Clark's Pharmacy, $180 for 500 grams. $20 shipping. They don't have a website, so make sure you use the number that Jessica supplies and don't use the number from Google. They're trying to get that. It's the wrong number. Anyway, naturopaths from certain states cannot use them. But $180 for 500 grams, which is a month's supply. It's pretty fantastic compared to the $1,000 or $2,000 I was quoted when I first started calling around.
Yeah.
Number 2, Custom Prescriptions in Washington. $225 for 500 grams, free shipping. That's the one I use. Number 3.
500 grams is typically a month's supply.
A month's supply roughly. At full dose.
At full dose, okay.
Yeah, and so some people may be at a third of a dose for months, and then some people may be on half dose for a year. It just depends like how fast you're able to tolerate it, and your doctor will definitely work with you on that.
Right, okay.
Number 3 is Apothecare in Florida. They have $250 for 500 grams. Shipping is dependent on where you live. Number 4, Hopkinton Drug, and this is $248 for 480 grams, $25 shipping. This is a pharmacy that's worked with Shoemaker for many years, and they carry multiple products of the Shoemaker protocol and more. And so if you're using other Shoemaker meds too as you go through, definitely keep Hopkinton on your radar and price check with them. So they carry a lot of stuff and really great prices. So
awesome.
So any other questions about that's basically step 2. So you can see how complex this entire protocol can get. It can seem really simple just because it's these few steps. Like 14 steps, get through them. But now we've covered basically steps 1 and 2 in 2 podcasts, and you can see how expanded it can get and how people can really get lost, and so they just maybe need a lot of support through the protocol.
Yeah, I feel like this could be like a whole huge series of episodes just because it is so complex and it can be very overwhelming. I can see just from today, like even just the process of starting the cholestyramine could be overwhelming for people.
Yeah.
With how many things you have to think about with the potential side effects, and you need to do your, the different diet and the fish oil and all this stuff. I can definitely see. And when you get to that point, you may also be very, very sick too. So that's a lot to have to deal with. So yeah, I'm very appreciative that you've shared this information with us. And then, perhaps sometime in the future, we can even do a deeper dive at some point as well. The door is always open. You're always welcome here. So, if you ever want to keep talking about it, we're open to it. But we're thankful that you've, been able to share the knowledge that you've learned through your own journey so that other people can potentially heal a little bit faster.
Yes, well, I know the mold community as a whole, we are just really grateful that you guys are opening this up and talking about it, because that's how we're going to change things. This is how we're going to get people the help that they need. by people talking about it, and we're real appreciative that you're having this on your podcast.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Totally. Awesome. Well, Lydia, did you have any questions?
No.
I think our brain's about to explode.
Yeah. It's a lot, but it's good because it's a great resource to put out there. Shoemaker has a book, correct?
Well, he has 3 main books.
Okay.
So, Surviving Mold, don't quote me on this. I think that was I know it was his latest book, and I think it was from 2010. And then the one before that was Mold Warriors. And then his first book that he put out was called Desperation Medicine.
Okay.
And these are the ones specifically about mold illness.
Desperation Medicine?
Yeah, Desperation Medicine. And so it has, I think they all really contain, it was from 2001, Desperation Medicine. He's definitely learned so much more about mold illness, but there's just some real gems of information in Desperation Medicine.
Okay. So would you recommend all of those, or do you have if somebody could only read one, which one should they start with?
If I would say someone can only read one, I usually recommend Surviving Mold. They're definitely not the easiest books to read. It's just a lot of information.
Sure.
But that is his latest one. It's going to have the latest information. Mold Warriors would probably be my second recommendation. But if someone could read all 3, I would just say try to read all 3. And then his website, too, is probably about as bigger than a book.
Yeah,
and it's
there's a lot of
just chock full of information, too. And then, like Surviving Mold and Mold Warriors, he also has people write chapters. So the Belperons, which is a family that their entire family was super sick, had to recover from mold. They've written a chapter, I believe, or he wrote one about them. I think Eric Johnson has written a chapter or 2. Greg Weatherman, who is one of the most sought-after remediation specialists who knows about mold illness. I believe he wrote a chapter, maybe in both books. So it really gives perspectives, other people's perspective on mold illness, too, and their area of expertise.
And some testimonials, it sounds like, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Eric Johnson really went through the Shoemaker protocol, but his information on mold avoidance is critical.
Okay.
And his involvement in the Lake Tahoe epidemic. So gives you some background of, where this all started, how it started, why we're not acknowledging it in the medical community.
Got it. Very
pretty
cool.
Fascinating. Yeah.
So you've given us a huge lot of resources here. So people can listen to this, they can do further reading, they can join these Facebook groups and get their hand held if they need to go through this stuff. So it's a great resource for people. So thank you so much for putting that out there, because it is a lot. I mean, I know myself just from stuff I've gone through, and it's nothing compared to this, like the eczema podcast that we did about my, specific thing, because that's a big problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're just searching and struggling, it's so hard to put it in perspective, too, because you're very emotional and vulnerable as well. So It's great to have all this, kind of put out there. So it's awesome. I appreciate it. And I do know that it's going to be helpful. It's something that people need to remember is if you're doing it, like Jessica said this at one point, and you've done everything you can to heal and you're just not getting better and you haven't looked into this piece, it's really worth getting started with. So listen to that first podcast. I did that VCS test and failed it myself. Right? Isn't that what it's called?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, goody. All right. Well, at least I know that, right?
Yeah.
So now I can take the next step and see if I need to keep going, kind of thing. So,
right.
And it's not so overwhelming to get started. So I appreciate it too myself.
That's great. Well, I'm really glad to share this information.
Awesome.
And it's always fun chatting with you, too.
Well, I've had a lot of fun having you on the show, so I'm thankful that you decided to come on and share more. And, I hope this helps a lot of people.
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and sign off for today. Thanks for listening to the whole episode. I know this episode was a little bit longer than our normal ones, but tons of great information. And if you haven't listened to the first episode already, that was episode number 30. So you can just go back in our archives and find that one and get the first part of all of that taken care of. So if you have any questions, definitely let us know, and we will talk to you guys again soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Vibrant Health Podcast. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to the information we're sharing. If this information resonated with you and you know others who could benefit from it, we would love it if you'd share it with them. We'd also be very appreciative if you could leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. If you're on our sites or YouTube listening to this, we'll have links down below where you can leave a review. If you're on your phone listening through the app, you can also leave a review directly through the app. It only takes about a minute, super fast, super easy, and your shares and reviews help us reach more people with our message of health and wellness. So we really, really appreciate your support. If you're looking for more information on health and wellness in general, both Lydia and I have a ton of information on our sites. You can find me over at jessicaespinoza.com, which is my main practice website and where I offer my 21-day sugar detox coaching. And in the future, I'm going to be offering nutritional therapy coaching as well. You can also find me on deliciousobsessions.com, which is my main real food and natural living website. You can find Lydia over at divinehealthfromtheinsideout.com, where she offers nutritional therapy consultations and hair tissue mineral analysis services for those who are ready to take their health to the next level. Lastly, if you have any suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, we would absolutely love to hear from you. We want these podcasts to be as informational and inspirational as possible, and we'd love to hear from you and understand exactly what you would like us to cover. You can email us or leave a comment below or even give us a shout out on social media. We both look forward to serving you and inspiring you to live the healthiest, happiest lives possible. Thanks for listening.